This is the sound of the future, the sound of a new kind of war, and the sound of utter helplessness. In 1944, the people of London were veterans of the Blitz. They knew the siren, the drone of the bombers, and the rattle of anti-aircraft fire. They knew the drill, but then came something new, something unseen. On September 8, 1944, a quiet residential street in Chiswick was torn apart. The weapon was the V-2 rocket. It flew too high, too fast, and too silently for any warning. It plunged from the stratosphere at 4 times the speed of sound Mach 4. Imagine the horror. A blinding flash, a deafening explosion, and total devastation. Only a few seconds later would the massive roar of the rocket, the delayed sonic boom, chase the sound of its own explosion down to the ground. You were dead before you ever knew you were a target. This silent terror was the ultimate psychological weapon. It proved that in a new age of technology, nowhere was safe and no defense was possible. This is the story of the V-2, a story of scientific genius, moral bankruptcy, and the single machine that linked Nazi Germany's final days to America's journey to the moon. The V-2, or Aggregate 4, was the brainchild of Wernher von Braun. His story is the definitive conflict between ambition and accountability. Von Braun was an aristocrat, brilliant, charming, and utterly consumed by rocketry. His true goal, he openly admitted, was never to hit Paris or London, it was to land on the moon. Von Braun found his budget, his engineers, and his secluded testing facility on the Baltic coast, Peenemünde. Here, von Braun led a team of thousands in a staggering feat of engineering. The V-2 was powered by a mixture of liquid oxygen and alcohol, thrusting the missile with a colossal 56,000 pounds of force. Its guidance system, featuring complex gyroscopes and trajectory computers, was decades ahead of its time. When the first successful rocket launch reached the edge of space, von Braun was ecstatic. He famously quipped to his colleagues, "We have proved our theories, gentlemen." The rocket worked perfectly, except for landing on the wrong planet, but the Allies were watching. They recognized the scale of the threat. In August 1943, the British launched Operation Hydra, a devastating air raid on Peenemünde. The raid delayed the V-2 program by months, but it forced the Germans to take their operation completely underground into a realm of unimaginable horror. The next chapter of the V-2 is its darkest: to mass-produce the weapon away from Allied bombers. The entire facility was moved to the Mittelwerks, a vast underground factory tunneled deep beneath the Harz Mountains. This was no ordinary factory. It was a hell on earth, staffed by slave laborers from the Dora-Mittelbau Concentration Camp. The V-2 was built bolt by prisoners, French resistance fighters, Soviet posts, and Polish intellectuals who endured unimaginable conditions. They worked 12-hour shifts in cold, dusty tunnels without sanitation or adequate food. Beatings were routine. Executions were common. The ethical compromise of the scientists was complete. They were forced to interact with the SS guards and the starving prisoners daily. The V-2 is therefore the greatest example of science being pursued at any human cost. It was a masterpiece of physics built entirely upon the wreckage of human morality. Despite the immense resources poured into it, the V-2 arrived too late and in insufficient numbers to change the war's outcome. But its psychological impact was immeasurable. The V-2 was indiscriminate. It was the ultimate random killer. The rocket hit pubs, schools, and theaters. A single V-2 falling on a Belgian cinema killed 567 people, the deadliest single rocket strike of the war. In Britain, it killed thousands and rendered hundreds of thousands homeless. One London resident described the experience. You couldn't run. You couldn't hide. You just sat and waited for your house to either stand up or disappear. The psychological burden of the V-2 was the constant knowledge of absolute vulnerability. You could be perfectly safe one moment and instantly vaporized the next. However, the British proved resilient. They covered up the true target locations, leading the Germans to believe the rockets were falling short, causing them to adjust the firing coordinates further away from the city center. It was a brilliant counter-espionage effort that minimized the damage, but the psychological terror remained. The world had seen its future, a world of push-button war. As the Reich collapsed in 1945, the intelligence services of the victorious Allies realized that the true war was only beginning. The future was not in tanks or planes. It was in the V-2. The scramble to capture German rocket scientists and hardware was the first real campaign of the Cold War. Wernher von Braun and his core team played their final, most crucial card. They carefully selected the American side, surrendering to the 44th Infantry Division. Their value was immense, their moral baggage ignored. The Americans, under Operation Paperclip, secretly brought von Braun and over 100 of his top engineers to the U.S. They scrubbed the Nazi Party affiliations from their files and granted them high-level security clearances. The ethical bargain was clear. Their knowledge was worth more than their past crimes. Meanwhile, the Soviets, arriving second, salvaged the Mittelwerk's remaining machinery and expertise. They too gained the foundational knowledge to build their own future ICBMs. The V-2 was the ultimate spoils of war. It ensured that the United States and the Soviet Union would embark on a dangerous, expensive, and history-defining competition, where the sky was no longer the limit. Von Braun's dream, born in the madness of war, was finally realized in the service of peace, or at least the Cold War's version of peace. In America, the V-2 was reverse-engineered to become the Redstone rocket, which put America's first satellite and first astronaut, Alan Shepard, into space. Wernher von Braun, the former Nazi scientist, became a celebrated American hero and the face of NASA. He went on to design the mighty Saturn, the three-stage giant that propelled the Apollo missions to the moon. Every stage, every system, every calculation had its origin in the terrifying V-2 program. The legacy of the V-2 is a haunting one. It is a reminder that the same physics that delivered terror to a London suburb also delivered humanity to the lunar surface. It stands as a monument to the painful, often brutal reality that the line between scientific progress and destructive force is not a line at all, but a tangled web of human choices and ambition. The V-2 was the first machine to touch space, and in doing so, it changed the course of history forever. Join us next time on Aviation Tailies as we continue to uncover the stories of the machines and the men who changed history. Subscribe now.